Hey, how you doing? I'm Dan Fredenberg. I'm here with my friend Jerry LoCoco. How you doing today, Jerry?
Good, amigo. How are you?
Fantastic, because I get to talk about your book, Gringo Salado. It's been very, very meaningful for me. I know that I originally got it just out of loyalty and knowing that your head and your heart is in the right place. I think you're a very humble person, and I think that this book here, it's really like an onion. It's got lots of different layers to it, and I think that for some people, they'll get what you're trying to get across really, really quickly, and then others might be a little bit confused on what your intentions are and all that sort of stuff. But before we get too deep into that, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah. Jerry LoCoco. I'm based in Tucson, Arizona. So I'm an Arizona guy. Grew up here. Was born and raised, and professionally, I'm in industrial real estate, and I'm a husband and father. And I always tell people, when they call me, "How you doing?" I say, I'm chasing kids and chasing deals, and there's not much time for anything else. And so, but yeah, and I wrote that book. Just a lot of reasons. There's more. It was like, well, why did you write the book? There's more than one reason why I wrote it, and some of those reasons kind of were became clear as I kind of started finishing the book, wrapping it up, as to what was actually pushing me to do something like that. So
I love that. I love that. And I'm especially happy that you mentioned career and all that sort of thing, because I think a lot of people, they feel like they have that book inside them, but it's really hard to hold down a career, and especially hold support a family and be there as a parent to make them into better people who you want to be around. So I think that's really important, and the fact that you pulled it off is really, really fantastic. I should mention before we get too far that if you go to jerrylococo.com, it's JLo with a Coco. It's really easy to spell. You can see you can get your copy of Gringo Salado via Amazon. You can also see all of Jerry's social media and all that sort of thing. But as far as if I were going to give the fastest version of what's the point of this book, what's going on, if I'm talking to a friend, I'd mention that it's clearly a memoir, which is something that in our previous interview on my channel, I mentioned that me personally, I was not inclined to write a memoir at all. And I'm actually really tempted to pursue that now that I've read this book. But summarizing it to the masses, I'd say that it's about coming from a bad place and not allowing it to define you. Now, when I say bad place, there's, there are, in this world, there's violent places, there's places where the climate is a real problem, all that sort of stuff. And then there's, when it comes to financial or economic difficulties, that's another one completely separate from that. So as far as that idea of summarizing coming from a bad place and not allowing it to define you, we'll get to some of the other main themes, but what are your thoughts on that way of putting it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a book about trying to make sense of suffering in the world, in the world in general, in your world, trying to make sense of things that are outside of your control. And one of the ways, or not one of the ways, but a way to do that is to read and write. So I say, silence, prayer, reading, and writing. And so that's really the practice that I kind of stumbled my way into. Not to say I didn't pray or write or read beforehand, but it really, praying, reading, silence, prayer, reading, and writing, oriented towards this goal of writing this book so that I could make sense of the things that had happened to me in the past, and make sense of kind of the world that I was living in, am living in, is that's the way. And so I think what happens is I think people, when I look at the things in the world that are there to distract you, this is the thing that it's distracting you from, right? Is dealing with these things, right? And the frustrations that come with not understanding, why are things the way they are in the world when we can see a better way, but it just doesn't get there. Like, it's just like it never, it just seems like nothing ever changes. We talked about politics earlier. It's like, so it's like, well, what are you going to do? You can face it head on. And the way to do that, I think, without it breaking you is through that practice of silence, prayer, reading, and writing. Because again, when you go, I was thinking about this yesterday when I was driving. They say, the process of illumination, the process of understanding is hard. Sometimes they say ignorance is bliss, right? So, but once you become conscious of things, the way that the way that the world is, the way that the economy works or doesn't work for a lot of people, the way that the systems are built, just trying to make sense of all these, the wounds and broken homes and families and all that stuff. You could just check out and ignore it, or you could face it. And it's hard to face those realities, but the way you face those realities to generate positive fruit, to make you a better person on the other side of it, is through that process of silence, prayer, reading, and writing. Because if you just try to face it head on without those tools, I think it could be overwhelming.
I completely agree. So you hit on one of the major themes that are in the book. It's on the back cover and all of that I think we really need to address. And I think that because of our rapport, I can do one thing with you that I can't with most, which is like really, try and push those boundaries and get some straight goods here. So the one that I want to address is, you mentioned prayer, and I want to address the stigma in some people. Like, obviously there are those who you're literally preaching to the choir, as they say, but when it comes to the stigma of religion, I think one of the most important ones, especially coming from your background, which was really, really hard. So I know that in the website you mentioned your youth was soaked in alcohol and drugs and violence, and you weren't the one doing the alcohol, drugs, and violence. And I think that's rather important to understand. So it was, a complete minefield of a childhood. But when, like, religion, it definitely helped you, specifically Catholicism. But one thing that I think, when people feel a stigma against religions in general, I think it mostly can be attributed to one feature of some religions, which is triumphalism. Okay. And the really terse way of saying what on earth is triumphalism, it's saying that you're going to find out in the end that we were right and they were wrong. In other words, basically saying there's only one true version of the story. And if that's the case, like if you think about the colonization of the Americas, the fact is, if I were Native and I was told, okay, unfortunately, because your grandmother never heard of Jesus, she's going to spend eternity in hell. And like, that's kind of a tough pill to swallow, because it was very nice.
I'm actually going to send you a video, because I was thinking about this the other day. I was working out. I was watching this guy's named Sam Shamoun, I think his name is. He's Syrian, and he was talking about this very, very issue. And so that's the thing is, so it's like, so there's a lot of issues there. So there's something that's called religious voluntarism, and that's where it's like, basically, you put the dogmas in your religion above love of God, love of neighbor. And so it's like, you're missing the point at that point. It's like a country club mentality about like, oh, well, the reason that I'm or Catholic or whatever is because it gives me a sense of superiority. And that is not at all, like, the Catholic faith is apostolic. It's like, you want to go out and you want to be an apostle, you want to go out and you want to save souls, right? And so I think there's some nuance and understanding. And again, I'm not an expert in this, but there are sources that would be good, and I'll share this video with you so you can watch it, because I think it's really good. to understand, like if you're not exposed, like that example you gave. Well, clearly, if they've never been exposed to the truth, then how could you be held accountable for not knowing, right? And so, but the thing is, I would the challenge with that though becomes, on the other side of it is well, there's no truth because they're all true. There's no truth, right? Right? It's like, well, they're all pointing to the same thing. It's like, okay, well, yeah, but where's your like? And they said, well, why do you have these? A lot of people get upset about Catholicism because they have sacraments. Well, why do I do all these things to have a relationship with Christ? It's like, well, you don't, but they help you. It's like I always imagine, like, just be like, do I really have to do this stuff, Lord? And it's just like him being like, well, if you want to be happy, because again, it's like, well, what is prayer? It's like, well, you're communing, you're talking to the creator of all things. And it's like, well, then are you born knowing how to pray? No. So then shouldn't we follow the people that came before us that could teach us these things? And that is what tradition is, right? It's and so, and then on the other hand, you have bad people in the church that have turned people away from it, right? That have abused their power, right? And I've struggled with that one. I wrote about that in the book, and so, I mean, I get where people come from. I understand that they've been hurt, by the church and by people, and so when I would say you've been hurt by people in the church, you haven't been hurt by the church, and it's been that way from day one.
Mm-hmm. The individual weakness rather than, some sort of conspiracy or specific, intent to harm.
Yeah. And so like what I wrote about in the book is like, well, when I was exposed to the traditional Latin Mass, for me, it was just something so transcendent and true that tied to an identity that I never knew I had, right? And just to orient, you said you were like, oh, you're a humble person, Jerry. You said that earlier, and it's like, well, my wife might disagree with you on that, but no, I mean, I struggle with that, right? And so we all struggle with that. Like that's the whole point. Like we are supposed to die to self, right? And in order to do that, in order to love God and neighbor, you have to die to self. Mm-hmm. And in a way to do that, you have to be humble. And so the way that you align your heart, your intellect, and your will towards those ends is the right worship of the creator of all things. And I know people are going to get mad. What do you mean right worship is better? It's like, well, for me,
correct. Yeah.
Well, it has to be oriented. Who's it focused on?
Right.
Right. It's like, well, if you're going to worship God, you should be worshiping God, not yourself, right?
Right, exactly. You don't be praying to God to fill your bank account with $1 million. That's not.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Or even like literally the orientation.
Yeah. Exactly. Like, why do you want $1 million? Right. Right.
It's like, well, and that's what I think is so, beautiful about the traditions and the faith is that there is a mystery to it, right? And it's like, why I don't, I get a lot of people that tell me this all the time. Well, I don't understand everything that's going on in the traditional life. I say, neither do I. I've been going to it for over a year now. There's something that again, it's not like, I know that this could sound like it's concocted in a way to convince people that it's really spiritual and supernatural when it's really not. But again, this is the way that Catholics worshiped God for at least 1,000 years. So it stood the test of time, right? And then it orients people. And then again, this is not to say they created this Catholic utopia in the past either, right? It didn't. There are many sinners that came out of there. But I'm just saying, for a guy like me, that came up, no father, mother was gone, you have no identity, and that's what's so scary about what's happening to the culture and the destruction of the families. These kids don't have an identity. They don't know who they are. If you don't have parents, how the hell are you gonna know who you are? And so for me, it was like an understanding of like this. Oh, this is who I am. This is at least 1,000 years old, and this is who I am on my mom's side and dad's side. If you went back through, on the Catholics, Scottish, Irish, Sicilian, this is who I am from, for 1,000 years, and so yeah, that's what was to me. I just connected so many dots. I was like, okay, well, if I get this part right, if I get the worship of God part right, then the other stuff in my life can fall in line. Not perfectly, right? We're not, it just doesn't, yeah.
Right. Now, so there's a lot to fence in and unpack there, but like one of the things that I mentioned, the reason why I mentioned how humble you are is you've got your law degree. And so I know that I can press you on these different questions, and I know I'll get a well thought out answer, even if you don't have all the answers. At least you'll have a fact pattern, or some evidence to support a particular case. And I really going back to my example of the triumphalism. The thing I like about your answer is it seems to include the legal principle of mens rea. The guilty intent. And so I just don't I couldn't believe that somebody who's a good person, who supports their community, isn't selfish, they're not neglecting the people that they're responsible for. If you say that they're going to spend an eternity in hell, I just can't make that jump personally. Whereas the other things that I think helped the two of us become friends online through LinkedIn and whatnot is respect for the classics, including many of the ethical tenets that are in the Bible. And I really like what you said a moment ago about losing your identity, because in a very profound way, when I first moved to Taiwan, that's exactly how I felt, because none of my achievements, none of my relationships, any of that had any relevance on my day-to-day life at all. In some ways that's liberating for some people, but that loss of identity, that loss of connection with your family, it's a real thing, and it's really tough to put into words. But some people find different answers. Me, like I was a Buddhist before I moved to Taiwan already, especially in what I call Western Buddhist sense, which doesn't have the different rituals or like fortune telling, which is more borrowed from Taoism. There's been a lot of mix compared to what Gautama said originally during his life, and how it's practiced typically. But the themes that I see you mentioning in your posts are things like stoicism, or basically when I think of other authors who are trying to achieve the same thing, which is be good regardless of what your map or path is. If it happens to be Catholicism, like you do have a horse in that race, and like that's the one that you believe the most. And so I'm sure that'd be great if more people get in there. But I think one of the things that you have to look out for when you wear your religious conviction on your sleeve like that is you might be labeled based off of sound bites instead of actually hearing someone out and figuring out, it's like, okay, so what have they got right? Like they say, like a broken clock is right twice a day, so even if you get a bunch of it wrong, there could be some invaluable stuff that's still in there. And the best author I can think of for that, as far as the situation and not talking about the content specifically, is Jordan Peterson. So in that sense, what are your thoughts as far as like putting yourself out there when you are going to run into the potential for some blowback, the way that Jordan Peterson?
Well, I think, he's the reason that I started writing, and so his self-authoring program was the was the outline for the book. And that $20 program that he spent time, effort, all the years that he took, working on his craft, his education. And again, I think, he has said some things that obviously, made people upset. But if we all look, I mean, who hasn't?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's again, we crucify people because we expect them to be like the person that we crucified. We expect perfection in people, and that's just, you're going to be disappointed. People will disappoint you, but that doesn't mean that you can just write them off entirely, because then that would mean we just write everybody off, right? And because find me a perfect person that hasn't made mistakes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Or that it has a lot of really good ideas and some bad ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And I just would say, like, particularly with Jordan Peterson, I think, you have to be, this is where the practices come in. Again, I don't know what his religious practices are or were, but if you get prominence like he had, or it still has, and again, it was a slow trajectory, right? Everyone's like, oh, look how quickly he came. He put a lot of work in, and there was nothing, and then and it exploded at one point. Well, that kind of notoriety, I mean, that is a burden, and mm-hmm. If you're not a person that's praying and you don't have a spiritual director, you're not doing an examination of conscience every night. One good question, that I've added to mine to help me, with what I'm trying to do here, this is something. It's like, okay, do I really need to do this? Like, I've battled myself in my heart, trying to align heart, intellect, and will, here. It's like, who am I doing this for? You know what I mean? Is it, and just because, like, and so I believe thoroughly that Jordan Peterson started off, and for the majority of it, and still, again, this is a day by day, hour by hour, issue. I think he did it because he loves people and he wants to help people, mm-hmm. right? But you get put in the limelight, you get all the the attention. How many people have we seen that have fallen to that, right? And I don't envy that, for anybody. But then at the end of the day, then there's also the idea, of the parable of talents, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, if you can do something with your talents, then you must, mm-hmm. And not because
back to what you're saying, who am I doing it for, right?
Who are you doing it for, right? And that's what I thought a lot about when I was writing the book. Towards the end, I was like, man, it was just so hard to finish, and it just really, like, helped me, like, okay, who am I doing this for? Like, to finish it, it's like, okay, well, I want to finish it for my children, and I kept thinking about, what about that kid that was like, what about little Jerry, when I was 15 or 20 years old? Like, man, if I would have had a book like this, YouTube video or whatever, something like that just gave me hope, that helped me make some better decisions in my life, right? If I could create something like that for other people, then that's worth doing. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And again, it's like, well, it could be ego, right? But I think today it's not ego, but it could be the ego tomorrow, right? And so that's why you must, like, you have to be a person, again, a silence, prayer, reading, and writing, and those practices are foundational. because this is, I believe, this might sound, I'm not sure what the like Buddhist beliefs about like spiritual, spiritual warfare and things like that. But I believe that we live in a spiritual realm. We are adjacent to a spiritual realm, and I believe in spiritual battle.
Mm-hmm.
I do. I believe
Mm-hmm.
that entirely.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes lots of sense, because after all, we have a biological side, and then we have the part that we design for ourselves, and so we're not our best selves all the time. And I think that basically people try to, put people in nice little boxes and just okay, like good or bad. It's like, come on, man, it's a spectrum.
Yeah.
People are chaos. They can believe completely conflicting beliefs and not even realize that they're doing it. But so just
you do touch on something. I mean, that was definitely something that I, growing up the way I did. It's called splitting. It's a term in psychology that I actually learned about when I was writing the book. I didn't know it, but like you literally growing up that way, you do have to make quick decisions. You good or you bad?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You gonna hurt me? Are you gonna hurt me or not hurt me or help me?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and that's one of those things that serves you when you're growing up that way, but quickly begins to undermine your life, as you kind of go, as you get out of that, fight or flight type of existence.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then as far as history goes, I want to say 3 quick points before to basically contrast what you're doing and show where it's more likely that that you will be well received versus poorly received in some circles like Jordan Peterson. So historically, the thing that got Jordan Peterson on people's radars was speaking truth to power. Specifically, there was a law in Canada that was limiting speech. And this is the way that he frames it. I get that many people will not agree that that was his actual intention. I think a lot of people thought that he was, homophobic or transphobic or something like that. But he just realized from his study of basically communism and the different revolutions that happened from that, how propaganda works. And the moment you control speech, you stop people's ability to reveal that they're buttheads, and you no longer are able to find out, okay, that person's a butthead and doesn't deserve the microphone. That person has his heart in the right place.
Well, and I think one of his main points though too is, it's like, imagine, you're driving you're flying a plane or whatever, and you got a co-pilot, and so you're trying to talk to each other about what's happening about reality. And as a culture, when you destroy the ability to at least say something you think is true, whether it's wrong or not, then that you destroy that function, and then, of course, there's power that's to be had there. If you can control speech, then that consolidates power.
Yeah, exactly. It's encouraging dishonesty. It's people will just lie about it. So yeah, I definitely get that. But one of the other reasons why I think Jordan Peterson had some unpopularity, which really applies to your story, is he throws out statistics about the troubles that men specifically are facing in society these days, and the sides of society that interpret all of the world's problems to a patriarchy. They'd be saying is like, what are you doing supporting men when men are the problem? Now, of course, even the way I said it, it sounds a little bit irrational, because it's half the population of the world. You can't just nurture 50% and leave the other 50% to squander. And in some places, you have a different situation than others. Like, for example, the overly male population of China, due to the one-child policy, like that's a perfect example of why you can't just say it's like, oh well, historically men have owned property, therefore they are the problem. I think that's an oversimplification of the situation, but that was one of the major things that Jordan Peterson focused on. Now, of course, the third one, I think there's some risk of as well, but you've already covered that to a large degree, which is, I think that people, if they tap into real truth and it becomes more or less of a habit, they start conflating the periodic, occasional inspiration from reality, speaking with that level of truth, with the times where they're just talking about their preference or something like that. So the thing that is basically inexcusable that Jordan Peterson did is fat shaming, even though, you know, like me, because, you know, I lost 30 pounds back like 5 years ago. I managed to keep it off. I'm the first one to say, you will feel better if you're thinner. Okay, like as in like on a day-to-day basis, you wake up in the morning, you feel better, you feel
I mean, that
more
should not be debated.
right.
You know what I mean? It's
Right.
like, well, and it's like, okay, well, who does this protect? You know, it's like our, you know, the foods, you know, our food system that is, you know, I don't know how it is in Canada, but you know, that video that I sent you this morning, they talk a lot about just the way that the food in the United States is produced, and how it just does not lead to human flourishing. You know, not everything and not every product, but you know, there's just again, it's like, you know, it's just objective reality, right? It's like, again, it's, you shouldn't. Where's your heart in these things? You know, that's what it goes back to too. It's like, gosh, I was reading something recently where it's like, you know, if you're going to speak to your neighbor or somebody like this about, you know, a hard topic, you have to ask yourself, like, where's your heart, right? Are you trying to, and I don't know what I'm not even sure what the context with Jordan Peterson was, a tweet or something like that, but, and that's the other problem in it's really hard to tell where somebody's heart is on a, you know,
soundbite or
35
tweet
character, you know, tweet or whatever. But so again, are you trying to, is this aimed at love and charity, you know, for your neighbor, for your loved one? Or is it aimed at, you know, just hurting them or making yourself feel better? You know, and again, and again, like you have to be, you have to, in order to not live a life by default, just repetitive actions, you know, just reacting to things. You have to be a person of prayer, right? You have to be a person that's willing to sit in silence for a little bit of your day to kind of reframe and regroup, and to actually be conscious of your decisions, like how you're acting, how you're treating your wife, how you're treating your children. You know, that's why like a nightly examine is so powerful, because you know, it's like, okay, I know that I fail here and here, and know that in the last month or whatever. Well, how are you going to make a change unless you reflect on it at a certain point, right? You won't. You know, these are just practices that people that lived in mud huts, you know, 1,000 years ago used to do. You know, and again, it stood the test of time. It's very important and valuable, but our busy culture today doesn't promote those things. And so, and that's what I'd say. Go, you know, kind of going back to your statement about that, is like, okay, where is your heart? And if you ask, at least for me, when I ask myself that question, there's been times where I've said things to loved ones that were aimed at their good, so my heart was in the right place, even though maybe they didn't want to hear it and they got mad at me. You know, that's still going to happen. And there were times where I was just trying to jab them. You know, if I'm being, you know, it's like, well, what's true? Like, you know, don't, you know, live not by lies, right? That's one of Jordan Peterson's, he talks about a lot. Is was it Solzhenitsyn? I think Alexander Solzhenitsyn said that. One of the Russian greats said that. You know, so you know, you have to ask yourself honestly, like, where's my heart in this? You know, so I don't know. I think Jordan, and again, you know, that's moment by moment, you know, day by day, you know, kind of thing.
And that's definitely how I live my life. I try and spend as much time in each moment making sure that it's the right idea for that moment. And even in the last week, you know, like what you just described, you know, that definitely happened. It was a funny situation, not funny haha, but funny as in like kind of predictable that it would go in a bad direction. So my kids are on summer holiday, and they want to like have fun, no school, play games and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that I've been doing to improve myself is working on a new language, which is French. And it's not really new for me in that sense, but my dedication to it has been really important. And just having somebody around, like, I think it's valuable for my kids, even though they go to French schools, to put some time in for study, some quiet time where you're not glued to, like some sort of feed or, stimulus, stimulus. You're trying to get coherent ideas. And they didn't want to read along with me. And I lashed out at them more harshly than I ought to have, because it's like, I just detected the selfishness, of, okay, like, I've always got time for myself to play games, but I don't have time to help dad better himself, or those things like that. And do I regret it? Yes, a bit, but like, usually I'm not really like that. But like, that's an example in myself that's a real hard one that I think people can take to the bank. Now, the next thing that I want to, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say real quick to that is like, okay, you'll be brutally honest with yourself, and when you do that, it hurts, right? And then at the same time, at the end of the night, you're doing a brief exam. You also say, okay, like, I'm going to go to bed, and tomorrow I'm going to begin again. Right? It's like, okay, like, I messed up. You know what I mean? What are you going to do? You can't just continue to beat yourself up over it, right? Make it right. Apologize to your kids. Apologize to your wife, and then try and get to the root of what. And that's where the silence and prayer and reading and writing comes in, because a lot of these things that come up like that, you explode on your kids about something. Maybe it really is entirely related to that, or maybe it's tied to something else. You can get to the root of those things if you can disconnect from the noise of the world. You can figure out, okay, what's really going on in here that made me react like this, right? And that's a very it's a very valuable process, to do that.
Yep, I completely agree. And I mentioned at the start of this session about how the book, it's about coming, and I'm not wrapping up yet, but the book is very much about coming from a bad place and not allowing it to define you. So to try and pick up the pace here, I'm going to do a lightning round where I'm going to have 4 different aspects of life. And I want to talk about how coming from a bad place could hamper you. Okay, the 4 are it could hamper your growth, it can hamper your happiness, it can hamper your success, and it can hamper your faith. And now, of course, faith, it could end up turning it into a magnifying glass, like when somebody's trying to torture some ants or something like that in the sun, which is a terrible thing to do. Don't do that. But lightning round, first one. So coming from a bad place, what are some ways that you're aware of that it could hamper your growth as a person?
Obviously, habits. So you adopt the patterns and habits of the people that are raising you, typically. I mean, thank God I had a couple good examples, early on with my grandparents. So I knew, I could see even as a young kid that there was a difference, right, between my parents and what my grandparents, and I knew there was a different way to live. And so yeah, I mean, that obviously that's a huge one.
Okay, and how about happiness? Coming from a bad place, how can it hamper your happiness?
Well, you have the wrong idea about what happiness is. I mean, that's the first one that comes to mind. So it's like, getting blackout drunk, doing drugs, getting married and divorcing, because you're trying to find happiness. Those are some ideas and things that I saw as a kid that, thankfully, I think a lot about, like my uncle that I grew up with, because he grew up kind of similar to me, pretty rough. His dad was violent. His dad was very abusive. So even worse than me. But, he started smoking weed when he was 11. he was basically an atheist, is at least what he told me. I remember the story in the book about, when we were watching the Discovery Channel, and, so, it can definitely turn you away. I think, I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, how can you find happiness in this existence by being an atheist? I don't, I'm not judging them, because I understand that, like, just the chaos in the world, it could definitely lead you to believe like this makes no sense, and couldn't possibly be a creator that would be so unjust. And, I get that, but yeah, it's a brutal existence, I think, and so trying to find happiness in that kind of worldview has got to be very difficult.
Yeah, it definitely is. And like I can tell you, like the philosophical school of thought of existentialism, it absolutely deals with that head on, which is like, how can you have a moral compass if you don't accept the religion in question? I'll put it that way, just when I'm loading the terms more.
Well, I would take it just further. How are you going to have a moral compass outside of love God, love neighbor?
Well, right. See, yeah, and that's where I was going. So in geometry and also in chess, you use the word of transposition, and the idea being, like, in a chess position, you can use a different opening, but it'll transpose into the same position. So what that means is all of the pieces are in the exact same places, but you had a different way of getting there. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's overlap. So I think that even as an atheist, you can still take ownership of your world and your community and the population, and then ask yourself that same question: who am I doing this for? Am I just doing it for myself, or am I doing it for others? Now, of course, it has one bit of freedom that I think is kind of tough there, but I think that's a huge one.
The one little thing I would add to there, and I wouldn't even call this pushback, but just adding to it, is there's that video I sent you a couple weeks ago from Professor Sagru, and it just talks about, I think the issue there for atheists is they see it as pointless. Right? Like, so that's one of the things, like, for me, is like, I had these three families that took me in, and if you were to look at that from a rational decision perspective, right, it made no sense for them to do that, right? They had an idea of who I was, where I came from, and it was not good, right? Where I came from, anyway. I was trying to be good.
Yep.
And so they did what was deemed to be irrational because they had hope, right? Some semblance of hope that their sacrifice for me would be worthwhile, right? That it would bear good fruit. And I think that's a hard thing for, I think that is the hiccup there, I think, when it's like, well, you can be this moral person and you can do these things, but the thing is, to be a moral person, to love God and to love neighbor, requires you doing things that just aren't rational. Sometimes, many times, like Sabru was talking about, right?
Right. So I think the important thing for the audience to think about when they're considering these would be the idea of conflation. And the easiest way to understand conflation is to think of Venn diagrams, the diagrams with the circles. There's some that's overlapping, there's some that's not. One of the best examples is all brothers are men, but not all men are brothers. So there are some men out there who have no brothers, and therefore they're not a brother, but they are still a man. Okay, so I'm trying to avoid any multiple, like more than two genders discussion when I say that. I'm just trying to use something that's Kant would call it a synthetic truth. So when you've got this idea of conflation, you've got this idea of how, like that transposition idea of coming to the same conclusion and acting in more or less the same way. it's more or less, similar. You're still going to have that moral compass. And when you were saying irrational, I think there's a little bit of conflation going on there, which is that if you're materialist, if you value, the pile of wealth that you've got at the end of your life on if you adopt Jerry LoCoco versus if you don't adopt the Jerry LoCoco, then it seems kind of like an irrational decision. But you're really prioritizing some things more than others, which is really the crux of the ethical ideas that we're saying here. You agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, I guess really, and maybe as I was listening to you and thinking through, you could take the idea of love God, love neighbor, and you could see that as just like love God or love God and love neighbor or else.
Right.
Or love God and love neighbor because you love God and you love neighbor. You know what I mean? It's like, this whole thing revolves around the Christian life. Everything amounts to that one word is love. Like that's the whole point. That's the whole point. That's the motivating factor. And so it's really hard to love God, love others though, when we're selfish. And again, that's where the dying to self part comes in. I mean, that is the example of Christ on the cross, like the ultimate example of being willing to die and suffer for others.
Yep. Yeah, I love that.
And it was done in love. It was done in love.
Yeah. There's no question about that at all. And on the same idea of conflation, though, I can also say that there's a definition issue, okay, which is like, how do you define God, and are there other synonyms that are more constructive or not as loaded? Okay, I had one person I met out in Taiwan who was ordained, but left any sort of preaching, any sort of religious spiritual leadership. He had a way that I really resonated with, which was saying that God is necessarily a man, not a woman, big old white beard, lives on a cloud, no big white beard, that's definitely not God. I have a problem with that, especially because I tend to lean towards the idea of God is everywhere, God is everything. And I think that people are in a real rush to cut that short and say God is everywhere except for in this particular spot that I don't like. I don't think that that's a great way of looking at it. And so me personally, when I think the word God, I think of it as a synonym for reality. In other words, if it's not real, it's not God. So
100% logos, right? In the beginning, there was the word.
Right?
Exactly. And so, and the word was made flesh. That's that's Christ. So yeah, I mean, again, like there's definitely, again, but the other thing too is that, and I know that people could take this to be like a cop out or a lazy example. They say the mysteries of the faith, right? People talk about there's things that look like we don't understand, right? Just because we don't understand some things doesn't mean we don't understand, other things, right? And again, like it's one of the things that I was trying to just in the book is like, there are times, I mean, it's just for me in my life, where I felt I felt God's presence in my life. Like it really absolutely felt like that time where, Rona, where it's like I could feel those people suffering. You know what I mean? What is that? What was that?
Right. Exactly. Bigger connection than atheists.
There's a supernatural realm, right? And so it's like, and you think about the universe, and it's like, oh, it just showed up. What do you mean? You go back to Aquinas, there's the prime mover argument, or the watch argument. He talks a lot about like, oh, you're going to go and you're on the beach, you find this intricate watch, and you open it, you look at the back, you see all these pieces. They're all just, put together that work, perfectly. It was like, oh, well, that just came from the sand. It's like, no, like there was a watchmaker.
Right. I love it.
Yeah.
So I've still got more to go through.
Yeah.
So next one on hampering I have is hampering success, and I'm going to throw in one of my own ones, which I think that if you come from a background like yours, or me geographically where I grew up, I'm not saying anything bad about the people who I grew up with. However, I am going to talk about one sentiment that people are likely to adopt about you, and not you personally. I mean you in the audience. I mean myself. People are going to think you are elitist if you're selective with your friends. And I think that is something that's absolutely pivotal for greater success, regardless of where you're coming from. In other words, if you're coming from the bottom, it's especially true. I think it becomes less and less true as you climb to higher economic strata. But so now I've thrown in my idea. What are your thoughts of coming from a bad place and how it can hamper your success?
Well, I mean, it could be a couple things. I mean, you could set the bar too low for your talents, inherent talents and abilities. And that's really hard to find who you are, what your strengths are, your weaknesses, that sort of thing, when you don't know who you are identity wise. If you've lost parents and you never really knew them, or they were around but not around because of drugs and alcohol or whatever, it makes that part really hard to even know what do I want. And then also you're fighting for survival. So you're just living a life based on survival. So you're just picking whatever thing comes along because you're surviving. There's that. And then there's the thing that kind of the place where I got to in some sense, not that I made like, all this money that I didn't have to ever work again, but I had accomplished a lot in my career and as far as education. And I had kept setting these goals for myself, trying to heal wounds as success. So I tried to use like material, worldly things to heal wounds, and I called that success. And so I got to a point where I didn't know what else to do. Like I was stuck because I knew that if I picked another goal, I just didn't have the drive to do it. And I didn't have the drive to do it because I knew it wasn't going to fulfill what needed to be fulfilled. But I wasn't clear on what needed to be fulfilled quite either. And so that's where, that's where this, the silence, prayer, reading, and writing came in to help make that more clear for me.
I love that. And since you did mention drinking and drugs, also in the happiness part of what can be hampered from a bad place, one of the reasons why I was able to lose my 30 pounds back like 6 years ago, something like that, 7 years ago, I can't even remember how long ago it was, but one of the parts is that I stopped being a daily drinker. And so because of that, I found it revealed the influence of people in my circles as far as, hey, we're celebrating, let's get wasted. Yeah. Oh, we're sad, we should get wasted. Hey, it's a holiday, let's get wasted. Oh, it's Friday, let's get wasted. There's excuses are endless, and I think you really have to see it for what it is and realize that happiness.
Well, there was something else I wanted to say though about the friends thing, because I see these posts all the time. It's like, you need to upgrade your circle, and you need to. It's like, people are human beings. They are not like, it's just such a materialist way of looking at human relationships. It's like, you know what? Like, I have friends that are teachers. I have friends that are not in, real estate or development or whatever. And I love them, and they're good people. And I'm not going to trade them in because I want to make more money. You know what I mean? That's just such a shallow, it's just, it just drives me crazy when I see that. I'm just like, I'm like, yeah, okay, well, you need to upgrade your circle of friends. It's like, well, how are you upgrading them? Because of their money? like that's even if that's not an upgrade, that's not the metric to determine whether that's an upgrade. Yes, I've had to limit my time around people who I love, but that have bad habits for sure.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I don't just write them off, and let me say this again. In the past, I would just write them off
Right.
because it was very much like you're either, again, splitting. You're gonna hurt me or you're not, right? And so, I write about that in the book. Is one of the things that's very hard is my business partner in the book. I talk about, I loved him. He was like a brother to me, and in many ways he saved my life. But it was like I could not be around it.
Mhm.
You know, I was fearful, maybe more fearful than I needed to be, but I was fearful, and I just knew that I couldn't help him. You know, and yeah, it's one of those tough things. But yeah, there's people like you want to be a millionaire, you got to upgrade your friends. It's like, well, okay, sure, you need to network with people who can show you different ways, and yeah, and sure, maybe some of those people can become your good friends, but don't just if you're just looking at the money thing, man, you're so off base.
Yeah. Yeah. Depending on anybody for everything is ridiculous. Like that was one of the things that helped me get along with my wife near the beginning, because she's not a philosopher. She's not constantly trying to, figure stuff
Yeah,
out. She's trying just like outside of career and the kids and all that sort of stuff. But I had to have other people in my life for that part, and
yeah,
and my lack of dependency on her for everything, I think, is part of the reason why we've been together for over 20 years now. So the last one, from what was supposed to be a lightning round, but turned into something much better
it's all
anyway,
right.
is basically it's how coming from a bad place can hamper your faith. And so for faith in particular, I think that when a lot of people, when they come onto hard times, they blame God and they've got a bad attitude about it. Now, you personally, like with your father dying when you were 6, if I recall correctly, like it's pretty easy to say, it's like, so like, come on, God, like, why you got to be like that? Like what's so fundamental about me that I don't get to have a father, which is one of the things that is fundamentally supposed to be there. Why couldn't I have a stable home? That sort of
Yeah,
thing. And it does go into the mysteries of God works in mysterious ways. But to take the idea even further home, one fairly famous, definitely famous, generally renowned actor and narrator, voiceover artist is Stephen Fry, and he's a devout atheist. And his way of saying it in different interviews was, if he were to be in the presence of God and was given the opportunity to ask what like any question at all, it would be of the form of, child cancer, how dare you?
yeah.
So those are the style of hard hitting questions that I think anybody of faith who is analyzes their own feelings and thoughts and these different things, that's going to come up. But what do you have to add as far as ways that coming from a bad place might lead you away from some sort of faith rather
Well,
than
yeah. I mean, I saw it with my mom and with my uncles. Uh, you know, they they turned they turned away from God. They were angry at God because of the tragedies that they had to experience as kids. And I get that. And then on the other side, I think a lot about my grandparents. You know, losing both their sons. That my dad died, and then shortly before my dad died, my uncle came back from Vietnam all messed up. They had to take care of him the rest of his life. And so they essentially lost both their sons. And these are people that, my grandfather fought through World War II. So he saw all kinds of terrible things. They lived through the Depression. All of this suffering that they had to go through as in their youth. you would think like, okay, like they're owed a life where they can raise their kids and be happy, and that's not what happened for them. And I think about this a lot, about, man, like how did they just not quit on life?
Mm-hmm.
And why, I'm so like, had they quit on life, what that would have meant for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They are looking down on me now, and they can see the fruit of their sacrifice, but they didn't see it when they were alive. I'm sure they struggled. They were probably worried about me and my sister all the time. Like, what's going to happen to our grandkids, being born into this absolute chaos, right?
Yeah.
What's the point of all this, Lord? But they didn't quit, and not to say they didn't struggle, with faith, because I know they did, but they didn't quit. And so I think about that a lot, in my life. It's like, okay, well, the suffering that you're going through right now, you may not even be alive to see the fruit from it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that's the part of like the, that's the part of the what a lot of people would say it's irrational. And then back to the comment about, the childhood cancer and all that. And it's like, I get that 100%. But we were talking about earlier, it's like, well, look at the food and the environment and all that. That's not God doing that. That's us doing that.
Mm-hmm.
It's us. We're the ones that are polluting the water and the food and putting all these chemicals. That's not God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What better segue could there be than this meme that I prepared just for it now on my screen? And it's flipped, but this is one of those answers. Just to read it out, it's somebody passing somebody a Bible and somebody answering, "No thanks, I'm not interested in eternal life. I've seen enough." So to wrap it up and show that optimism is also absolutely key in life. I think this is a good springboard for that before we go. I know that LinkedIn is the best way to reach out to you. Make sure you do hit jerrylococo.com. I should throw a QR code so you can just scan it and visit there right now. But if like, I'd say this is one of the hardest sells that you're going to have is as somebody who says there's so much pain and suffering in life. And usually people who say that, they didn't have it even half as hard as you did. So what's your response, and what are some parting words here that come to mind there, Jerry?
Yeah, I mean, you just they always, there's a saying is, you got to meet people where they are. And I think a lot of that, when you dig into what that really means, is you have to understand their wounds and where people are coming from. And I understand, there's people that have suffered mightily, and so we can't, nor are we responsible for the whole thing, for this whole universe and the challenges that we have, right? But we are responsible for that thread that we see that's in front of us, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think the more that we respond to that, the more fulfilled we will become, and the better the world, the better the world will become. If we start answering that call. I think the reason that there's so much unhappiness in the West is because we've just really become selfish in many ways, and we forgot that. We forgot the the love of neighbor.